Hi everyone, so this video and the next following videos will be on this A-level physical geography topic, hazards. I used to be an A-level geography student a long time ago, so bear in mind if this information is not accurate or up to date with the new curriculum, but hopefully this will aid your revision. Okay, so let's start with understanding the concept of a hazard, natural hazard, and a disaster. A hazard, let me highlight, is a threat which has the potential to cause injury, loss of life, damage to property, socio-economic disruption, or environmental degradation. A natural hazard is a hazard that arises from natural processes or phenomena occurring in the Earth's environment, and a disaster occurs as a result of a hazard, and they are serious disruptions to the functioning of a community that exceeds its capacity to cope using its own resources. And just to go back to a hazard, a natural event can only become a hazard if it poses a potential risk or threat to someone. So let's say there's an unpopulated, uninhabited island and it were to experience a hurricane, it wouldn't be categorized as a hazard because it didn't affect a population and no one's life was at danger. So there has to be a presence of people for a natural event to be called a hazard. So there are three types of natural hazards: geophysical, let's do purple, and these are driven by the Earth's own internal energy sources, for example, plate tectonics, volcanoes, seismic activity. Atmospheric, these are hazards to do with the atmosphere, weather systems, so tropical storms, droughts, and hydrological, so these are driven by water bodies, and it's to do with their movement, so floods, storm surges, tsunamis. I forgot to mention the other slide with the definitions, that was also borrowed by the AQA textbook. Okay, so these are common characteristics of natural hazards. These are just pulled from the AQA spec, and we'll just go through them. Each has clear origins and distinctive effects. So this means natural hazards have identifiable sources or causes that trigger them. For instance, earthquakes result from the movement of tectonic plates, and this will be a clear origin, and its distinctive effect would be ground shaking. So in other words, natural hazards have a very distinct origin and a consequence / effect. Little or no warning. As we know, many natural hazards occur suddenly and with no minimal warning, and this lack of advance notice can make it very challenging for individuals, communities, authorities, especially low developed countries, to respond effectively. And if we were just to go back with the earthquake example, earthquakes can strike without warning, and consequently this would leave very little time for preparedness measures. Exposure to the risk may be involuntary. So people and communities often find themselves involuntarily exposed to the risks posed by natural hazards, and hazard events can impact areas where populations have settled due to various factors, and I'll elaborate that a little bit later on. But in other words, it means individuals may face hazards without actively choosing to do so. Most damage and loss of life occurs shortly after the hazard, but impacts may last into the future. So the majority of damage and loss of life resulting from natural hazards usually occurs in the immediate stage that follows a hazard event, so the first few hours, and this can involve destruction caused by the initial impact, so casualties, loss of life, the collapse of buildings during an earthquake, or flooding of areas due to heavy rainfall. But also these effects, the effects of hazards can also extend beyond the immediate event, so secondary effects, and they can lead to long-term consequences such as displacement, ongoing environmental changes, or perhaps even for psychological trauma. So it just explains primary and secondary effects, really. Their scale and impact requires an emergency response. This is quite straightforward. A natural hazard will bring about a need for emergency response. So governments, organizations will require an emergency response, for example, from search and rescue operations, medical aid, evacuation plans, and these can help the community recover from the immediate primary effects of the hazard and can mitigate future risks. Okay, so now moving on to hazard perception. Hazard perception is how people react to the threat of a hazard, and it's influenced by various factors, and we'll go through them now. Socioeconomic status. So individuals with lower socioeconomic status often face more significant challenges in preparing for and responding to natural hazards, and this may be due to limited access to resources, limited housing options, and poor healthcare. All of these can increase their vulnerability and risk. And let's just circle back to poor housing. This may be due to population growth or urbanization, but people may be forced to migrate to hazardous areas such as very steep hillsides, and this will make them more prone to landslides, and this can affect hazard perception because they may feel a sense of helplessness, which may be more likely in deprived or poverty-stricken areas. On the other hand, individuals with higher socioeconomic status may have access to better resources and living conditions, which can affect their hazard perception. They may live in safer neighborhoods, have access to better healthcare, and generally may be better informed about potential hazards. I think it's also important to note countries with a higher economic status, so HICs, more economically developed countries, they more like to have a better governance and so a stable government, and the government can encourage builders and archaeologists to construct natural disaster-proof infrastructure that have the ability to withstand the impacts of natural hazards. Moving on, level of education. So education can enhance a person's ability to understand and assess risks. More educated individuals may have better critical thinking skills, and so in turn they are more likely to perceive a hazard accurately. In more economically developed countries, the country has the capability of providing the necessary education for residents to learn how to act if a natural hazard were to occur, and this could be as simple as providing volcanic eruption preparation checklists, emergency kits, practicing evacuation drills, conducting relevant lessons in school, and all of that can affect the populations or an individual's hazard perception. Employment status. Employment status can affect an individual's ability to respond to natural disasters. For example, people with stable employment, they have the means to invest in disaster preparedness, and they're more likely to facilitate financial preparedness and recovery after disasters. And also comprehensive social safety nets may also be available, whereas those with precarious employment may struggle to allocate resources for such measures. Religion, cultural background. I think religious and cultural beliefs can really shape a person's attitude towards risk and natural hazard. Religious individuals might interpret hazards as as a deliberate part of God, or it could be an inherent aspect of the natural life cycle, and so in turn it may lead them to think that hazards are not inherently negative, whereas individuals who have strong environmental beliefs or those who prioritize environmental preservation may regard hazards as significant threats to the natural ecosystem, particularly those that are increasing in frequency due to the effects of global warming, for example, wildfires. Family situation. Larger families are more common in LICs, and so family dynamics heavily influence hazard perception and disaster preparedness and response. They may possess the responsibility for protecting and providing for family members, and also similarly in HICs, while family size may be smaller, the family dynamics can still influence hazard perception. Past experience, so previous encounters with hazards and the outcomes of those experiences play a crucial role in shaping hazard perception, because people tend to rely on past experiences to assess the likelihood and severity of potential dangers of the current hazard if it were to occur. Personal values and personality. I think personal values can influence how individuals prioritize and respond to hazards. For example, if someone were to be more risk averse, or conversely risk taking, that can impact hazard perception, because risk averse individuals may be more cautious and vigilant, while risk takers may downplay or perhaps underestimate certain hazards. So overall, all of these factors are interconnected and can vary widely from person to person, but they all shape an individual's perception of a hazard. Okay, so this is going to be the last slide because I'm too tired. These are 3 human responses to natural hazards. There are more than 3, but these are the key ones that I pulled from the AQA spec. So fatalism. Fatalism is a passive response to natural hazards, and it's characterized by the belief that these events are inevitable and there's little that can be done to prevent or mitigate their impact. It often stems from a sense of helplessness or powerlessness or resignation in the face of natural disasters. Behavioral traits. So fatalistic individuals may not be proactive. They may not take proactive steps to prepare for or respond to hazards because they believe the outcome is predetermined. They accept losses and they may passively accept their fate too. Factors affecting fatalism. It could be due to your socioeconomic status, lack of access to resources and education, past experiences with frequent hazards, and in some cases cultural or religious beliefs may also play a role in fostering fatalism. As mentioned before, people may believe that it's just part of the natural life cycle. Moving on to adaptation. This is an active response to natural hazards, and it involves preparing for and responding to natural hazards with the goal of reducing vulnerability and minimizing the impact of disasters. It acknowledges that while hazards may be inevitable, their effects can be managed and mitigated through planning and resilience building measures. So immediately it's contrasting fatalism, because someone with an adaptation attitude will be active in taking the necessary measures. So behavioral traits. Adaptive individuals and communities take practical steps to protect themselves and their assets constructing resilient infrastructure is an example, along with developing emergency plans and participating in disaster drills. Factors affecting adaptation. These could be access to resources, education, past experiences with disasters, and the presence of effective disaster management. In LICs or low economically developed countries, they're more likely to have a corrupt government, and that government may not have a strong initiative to direct the country's behavioural response to one representing adaptation or prediction, which is one I haven't covered today. Whereas HICs are more likely to adopt this adaptation response because they have better mitigation resources in place. For example, they may have skilled individuals who are educated in seismology, or there may be advanced technology to detect earthquakes, for example, and there may be infrastructure that is natural disaster proof. And last one is fear. This is a natural emotional response to the perceived threat of natural hazards. When people experience fear in the face of impending disasters, it can motivate them to take immediate actions to protect themselves and their loved ones. Behavioral traits: fear can trigger a range of responses, from seeking shelter and evacuation to seeking information and guidance from authorities. It can also lead to heightened vigilance and readiness during a hazard event. Factors influencing fear. Fear is typically triggered by the perceived severity and proximity of the hazard. Effective communication by authorities and media can amplify or alleviate fear, depending on the information provided and its clarity. So those are 3 human responses, and they're not mutually exclusive, and individuals and communities may exhibit a combination of these reactions. It's important to note effective disaster management and risk reduction strategies often aim to promote adaptation, while addressing and mitigating fatalistic tendencies. And also HICs and more economically developed countries recognize the role of fear in motivating timely and appropriate actions during hazard events, and assessing these responses can help mitigate the impacts of natural hazards. So that brings us to the end of the video. This is my first video, so apologies if it seemed rushed or disjointed. Feedback would be very much appreciated. Thank you all for watching.